Welcome everybody. This Parsha is called Tizaveh, literally means you will command. And we continue on the theme of the temple, the tabernacle, the Mishkan with the Jewish people, which the Jewish people built in the desert. Last week, we really talked about the actual structure and the furniture. So the construction of the walls, the roof, foundations, the dividers of the temple. There were two rooms and there was a courtyard. So that was one theme last week. And then also we began with the furniture, the ark, the menorah, the altar, etc. So we have the commandment for the structure and for the furniture. This week we talk about the people who are going to perform the service in the temple. And that is Aaron and his sons, the priests. And the entire portion is dedicated to the priests. So it begins with the garments of the high priest. That's about half the Parsha, is the garments of the high priest. We get a detailed description of the garments they should wear, elaborate description of beautiful garments. And that's the first half of the Parsha. The second half of the Parsha describes what the inauguration process. In other words, to prepare the priests to serve in the temple, they have to go through an inauguration process, which means they have to go through a specific service, 7-day service where they would offer specific offerings. And that was literally called Miluim. Miluim is the inauguration. Literally, milu limale is to fill up. In other words, to fill them up with the power and the potential to serve in the temple. So in other words, if last week was the structure and the furniture, now we're talking about the people who served in the temple. Like last week, there are many details that on the surface are not really relevant to us because we're not making the temple today, and we don't have the priests serving in the temple, and they certainly don't wear these beautiful garments. But again, like last week, when you come from the perspective of the deeper spiritual side of the Torah, then every detail of the high priests, of the garments of the high priests, has to be relevant in the service of every Jew. Because like we said last week, when the Torah says, make for me a sanctuary and I will dwell within them, the sages teach that, certainly the Kabbalistic sages teach, that God says in them is the plural. God says make a temple in the heart of every person. So we too have to make a temple in our heart, figuratively. And if the temple needed the structure, and we discussed what the structure represents and what the various vessels represent, and we didn't do it all this year, so we have another 2 portions coming up, not next week, but the following 2 weeks, which goes back to the concept of the building of a temple. So we want to really think about every dimension, every aspect of the temple itself, and figure out what's the spiritual equivalent. And now we're going to try to do the same for the garments of the high priest. Hopefully we'll be successful, at least to some degree. I'm not sure I can explain every detail, but I guess the big idea is we have to figure out what the equivalent is in our own soul. Some of the ideas we said in the past, certainly the big ideas, but hopefully we can add and elaborate and relive and rethink about it and reapply, which is why we're here on this beautiful Sunday morning that feels almost like spring. The few degrees will get me to spring. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we'll share the screen and we'll read the Parsha in a nutshell. Okay, so this is Tizaveh. God tells Moses to receive from the children of Israel pure olive oil to feed the everlasting flame of the menorah, which Aaron is to kindle each day from evening till morning. Okay. We'll discuss this. Let's read. We'll read the nutshell, then we'll get back and discuss what's happening here. The priestly garments to be worn by the Kohanim, the priests, while serving the sanctuary are described. All Kohanim wore the ketonet, which is a full-length linen tunic, a michnasayim, linen breeches, mitznefet or migbat, a linen turban, and avnet, a long sash wound above the waist. So these are the 4 garments that both the priest and the high priest wore. In addition, the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, wore the ephod, an apron-like garment made of blue, purple, and red dyed wool, linen, and gold thread. So they would weave together these various colors of wool, plus linen, plus gold, and each thread was woven of all these threads. And then they would make the apron. The Khoshen is the breastplate containing 12 precious stones inscribed with the names of the 12 tribes of Israel. The Me'il, a cloak of blue wool with gold bells and decorated pomegranates on its hem. And the tzitz, a golden plate worn on the forehead, bearing their inscription, Holy to God. Okay, so that's where we have the first half of the Parsha is the garments of the high priest. Tizaveh includes God's detailed instructions for the 7-day initiation of Aaron and his 4 sons, Nadav, Avihu, Elazar, and Itamar, into the priesthood, and for making of the golden altar on which the Ketoret incense was burned. So now we understand what the Parsha is doing. It's very structured. We understand everything that's supposed to be happening. But before we get into the garments and the high priest and what does it mean to fill up to the inauguration of the priests, we want to look at something else. And what's surprising about this nutshell is the first paragraph and the last line. The opening statement of the Parsha is God tells Moshe to tell Aaron to tell the Jewish people to bring the oil and light the menorah. So the first question that jumps out, why are we telling of the commandment to light the menorah here? This is not the place to tell you about specific offerings in the temple. In fact, the commandment to light the menorah is reiterated in the book of Leviticus, where the book of Leviticus is the place where you talk about the service in the temple. All we're trying to figure out is how to build the temple and how to make the garments for the people working in the temple and how to inaugurate the temple. Okay, but the specific services in the temple, go to the third book, the whole Vayikra, the whole third book of Leviticus talks about the laws of the offerings and the various sacrifices and the various services. And what is it doing here? So that's the question, the beginning. We also have a big question about the end. Why? What's the end? The last line here, they drop it in on the side. No one notices, but the end is very surprising. At the end, the last line, and for making the golden altar on which the Ketoret incense was burned. So here, after we hear about the garments of the high priest, of the priest and the high priest, after we hear about the preparation for the inauguration of the priests, now the Torah says, oh yeah, oops, we also have to build one more piece of furniture, which is the incense altar. Now I ask you, where should the incense altar be placed? Where should the commandment for the incense altar be placed? Should have been placed last week. Last week we talk about the structure of the temple and the furniture. So why are you telling us the incense altar at the end of this week? So we have a question about the beginning of the Parsha and the end of the Parsha, even before we get to the body of the Parsha. Okay, so now we have problems. Jews like problems. If you have problems, then there's what to talk about. If there's no problems, if everything makes sense, then we can go home. So we like problems, and we'll start dealing with the problems. So to start dealing with the problems, we really want to look in the verses. We're going to read a few verses, deal with the beginning of the Parsha. Then we'll spend some time on the garments of the high priest, and then we'll get back to of why all the classic commentaries ask, why is the incense altar at the end of the Parsha totally out of place? Should have been last week. It's almost like an afterthought. It's almost like God forgot and said, oops, we forgot to mention the altar last week. Let's mention it this week. Obviously, that's not the case. So there must be a deeper secret here. And the mystery is alive and well. Okay, so what we'll try to do now is open up the verses and share the screen again. So if you want to look at the stone edition of the Art Scroll, that would be on page 465. Otherwise, we'll show it on the screen. Here we go. Opening statement of the Parsha. And you shall command the children of Israel, and they shall take to you pure olive oil, crushed for lighting, to kindle the lamps continually. Okay, so in other words, here who should provide the oil? We know who lights the menorah. Aaron lights the menorah. That's going to be in the next verse, verse 21. But who provides the oil? Who provides the flame? The Jewish people. Moshe has to command the Jewish people. Okay. Every single word here is significant, and there are pages and pages of Kabbalistic and Hasidic writings on every detail here. Unfortunately, we can't do everything on one foot, so God will have to bless us with many more years of life. Verse 21, in the tent of meeting, outside the dividing curtain, that is in the front of the testimony, Aaron and his sons shall set it up before the Lord from evening till morning. It shall be an everlasting statute for their generations from the children of Israel. And then Exodus chapter 28, we start talking about the garments. But before we talk about the garments, we have the commandment to light the oil. And in case you were wondering, because the Torah is going to say it many, many times at the end of the book, exactly where to place the menorah, in case you were bothered by the question of where the menorah belongs. So verse 21 tells you where the menorah is. Make no mistake, it's not inside the Holy of Holies. No, it's outside the curtain that divides the Holy from the Holy of Holies. So now we know who brings the oil, we know who lights it, and we know where it is ignited. Beautiful. It's a very important information. We're going to have it. It's written again in Leviticus. It's written again in Numbers. Why is it written here? Why do I need to know about the menorah? What's happening here? So that's a question, and there are many different angles to talk about this. But I'm going to give you one interpretation from the Kli Yakar, which I like. Who was the Kli Yakar? The Kli Yakar was 17th century sage. He wrote a commentary on the Bible, on the Chumash. He was also a Kabbalist. He was influenced by the Maharal of Prague, he was the Maharal's successor. And it's printed on many, his commentary is printed in many of the classic Chumashim Bibles, and he's very good. So let's see what he says over here. But before we get to what he says, you have to introduce another question, because a Jew always asks a question to get to the answer. If you have one question and you don't know the answer, ask another question. And if you ask the second question, you may get insight for the first question. So we just keep asking. So let's look at these two verses. We have a problem with these two verses. There's a little bit of a contradiction. What's the contradiction? If you look at verse 20, and I ask you, when does the menorah light? When does the menorah burn? So let's read verse 20. And you shall command the children of Israel, and they shall take to you pure olive oil, crushed for lighting, to kindle the lamps continually. Tamid. Tamid means always, continually. Ner tamid, continual lamp, continual candle, which, by the way, is the source that if you go to many shuls, I think mostly Ashkenazic shuls, I don't know about Sephardi shuls, not Chabad shuls either, but if you go into many Ashkenazic shuls, in the beginning, in the front of the shul, what do you have? You have a ner tamid. You have a continual candle. What is that? That's a reference that's supposed to commemorate the candle of the menorah in the temple that burns always. So you know what I'm talking about, right? Give me a thumbs up or a hand or a shake if you've seen in the front of the shul the candle in the front of the shul, the continual candle. Was it just me, or has anyone seen it? I think you've seen it. This morning, my brother-in-law says, we have a family chat, and he puts a question on the chat. He has a very big problem. What's the problem? Oh, Barry's seen it. Good. What's the problem? The problem is that there's a family. He has a Chabad house in some suburb, and the parents call the rabbi, and so we have a very big problem. He says, "What's the problem?" He says, "We need to expose our daughter to more diverse elements of Judaism." He says, "What's the problem?" She says, "Her whole life she went to Chabad, so in her mind, Chabad is synonymous with Judaism. So now she went to Israel, and she tells her friends, 'Okay, it's Friday night. We're going to Chabad.' They're like, 'Why Chabad? You go to shul.' She says, 'No, you go to Chabad.' So the big problem is that in her mind, Judaism is Chabad, and that's just the way it is, and there's no other options. So what are we going to do?" She calls the rabbi. We have a very big problem. The Chabad rabbi, she says, "We have a very big problem, and my daughter doesn't know that there are other shuls other than Chabad." So I feel a little bit like that because we don't have a ner tamid. We don't have a continual lamp. But at least Barry has been to other shuls, and you have the continual lamp in the front of the shul. And again, it's commemorating the verse in this week's Parsha, continual lamp. I'll confess that when we were growing up, we went to school in the Brooklyn Jewish Center. Our school was the building of the Brooklyn Jewish Center. If you know anything about Brooklyn, it was probably the most famous conservative temple in the entire Brooklyn in 20s and 30s. I saw a clipping from a newspaper. I have a book. Somebody gave me the book. Somebody gave me the book. Roberta gave me the book about New York and before the Depression, and they have the magazine picture, the newspaper pictures of when the school opened, and it was the first shul in America that had a swimming pool. Okay, so that was it made the news. The shul had a swimming pool. Fine. So that's where we went to school. So at that point, the conservatives, the temple was still there, and there was a very, very grand temple, like 4 stories high, the ceiling, and there was a Ner Tamid. There was a continual lamp in the front, so we knew what the Ner Tamid was. So we had an education. Go ahead, Vicky.
Well, I had a question to you and to Barry. What does it look like? Is it like a one of the lights of the menorah, or just one candle?
Now they just have one candle, and typically just a light bulb. They put a light bulb, and that shul was a red one, a little red light bulb. But it's in the beginning of the shul and a continual lamp, because this verse says "La'alot ner tamid," to light forever. Okay, wonderful.
Yeah, like a flame, a little like brass flame, just like a glowing. Okay. Yeah.
So red, it looks like a flame. It looks like a flame, a jumping flame.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So that's the high tech ones. It looks like a flame. It looks like a fire burning. But again, it comes from this week's Parsha. Okay, wonderful.
I think Temple Shalom has one, I think.
Yes, I would imagine so, because it's, I would imagine so. Yeah, I've been to Temple, I don't remember seeing it, but I would imagine they have it. Okay, in any case, let's continue with the verses. What's the problem here? So everything is fine. The problem, of course, is that, let's look verse number 21. In the tent of meeting, outside the dividing curtain that is in the front of the testimony, Aaron and his sons shall set it up before the Lord from evening till morning. It shall be an everlasting statute for the generations from the children of Israel. Oops. Here it says the menorah lights from the evening till the morning. So is it from the evening till the morning, or is it continuous? Is it always? Is it the entire time? So what do you do? So the simple interpretation is not a question, because tamid, continually, doesn't mean always. Continually means, like Rashi says elsewhere, that if you do something every day, it's continually. Right? If I say every morning if I do something every night, I do it always. What does always mean? Always means 24/7, every single minute of every single day. No, I say I always go to the gym. Listen, what does always mean? It means every day. Doesn't mean I'm in the gym the entire day. So the simple meaning is that in the beginning it says, you kindle the lamps continually, or in the word Hebrew, tamid, always. And then every day is always. And when do you light it? You light it from the evening to the morning. That's the simple interpretation of these verses, where it's not a question. The Talmud, however, says no. The Talmud says it's alluding to a miracle. What happened? In the menorah, there are 7 branches of the menorah. Aaron would place, or the high priest or the priest would place oil in all 7 lamps, the same amount of oil. 6 of those candles lit from evening to morning. That's the natural. There was one candle, the Easternmost Candle. In Judaism, everything is complicated. So what is the Easternmost Candle is another discussion. There are no less than 3 opinions. Westernmost Candle. There are no less than 3 opinions. We got one menorah, 7 branches, okay? But there are 3 opinions. What's the westernmost candle? Just to tell you how we keep things interesting. So the westernmost candle burned always. And the Talmud says that at certain periods of the temple, not always, but at certain periods, when miracles happened in the temple, they put the same amount of oil in all the candles. 6 of them burned from evening to morning. But one, the westernmost candle, burnt all night, burned 24 hours. And that was testimony that the divine presence dwells within the Jewish people. So that's why we have, was it always or was it evening to morning? It depends. The westernmost candle was always. The other 6 were evening to morning. Okay, that's a beautiful interpretation. It's a medrash. The Talmud quotes it. It's a miracle. Didn't always happen, but there were at the second temple, it didn't happen, for example. But during the first temple, there's a list of miracles that happened in the temple. This is one of them. How does this help us? How does this help us to our bigger question of what are we talking about? Why are we talking about the menorah? It's out of place. We should be talking about the structure of the temple, not the specific services in the temple. Says the Kli Yakar, beautiful interpretation. The Torah emphasizes the place where you lit the menorah. Where did you lit the menorah? In the tent of meeting, outside the dividing curtain that is in the front of the testimony. The Jewish people, nobody went to the inner chamber. Nobody went to the Holy of Holies, except for Aaron on the high priest on Yom Kippur. Nobody went into the deepest dimension. Where did the people go? Well, even if you're a priest, you can only go to the outer room. The problem is if you're in the outer room, you don't see the tablets of testimony. You don't see the luchot, you don't see the tablets. Now, the tablets was the place where the divine presence dwelt, and you felt the divine presence when you went into the Holy of Holies, and you saw the ark with the tablets. Also, there were miracles with the tablets, which we don't want to get into this week, we'll get into next week. Just the structure of the tablets were miraculous, how the letters stood, we'll get to that next week. So if you can get into the deepest dimension, you would feel God's presence and you would see miracles. The problem is that most of us, the people, are not going into the deeper dimension. They're outside the dividing curtain. So God says, okay, what I'm telling you now is that there is also the sense of the divine presence in a lesser dimension that could be felt in the outer chamber of the temple. And what is that? That's the westernmost candle of the menorah. In other words, if you go into the deepest chamber, then you feel the divine presence fully. And that's why we don't go in there only on Yom Kippur, because we're only on that level on Yom Kippur. But even if you're in the outer chamber, don't worry. You could still sense the holiness and the miracle and the divine presence, even though you are sensing it in a lesser degree, but you're sensing it, you're seeing it only in the westernmost candle, but it's still there. Says the Kli Yakar, why are we telling you about the menorah? Because we want to refer to the miracle of the menorah to tell you about the temple, that the miracles in the temple happen not only in the inner chamber where nobody goes, but also where generally nobody goes, but also in the outer chamber where the priest goes every day. So it's really a feature of the temple. It's not about the service. We're not here to tell you about the service. We're here to tell you that the menorah lights continuously, or the westernmost candle lights continuously. The way we do it is by telling you how Aaron has to light it, and he lit it continuously, or from evening to morning. It's just a way to tell you that you could sense the holiness and you could sense the miracle even in the outer chamber. That's what the Kli Yakar says. So we know this is a feature of the temple. Now I want to tell you what that means in the spiritual life of every person. But but you see the layers. We have the question on the verse, we have the Kli Yakar's answer, which is based on another question, and now we're going to figure out what that means to us. So what it means to us is as follows. There are two chambers. There's the inner chamber and there's the outer chamber. And there's many ways of discussing what the inner chamber represents and what the outer chamber represents. But we're going to go with a Hasidic interpretation that says as follows. The temple is the wedding canopy. The temple is the place where God and the Jewish people marry. And if you bring two people into a room, there's going to be two different perspectives. So at this wedding, at this marriage, there are two perspectives. There's the divine perspective, and there's the perspective of the Jewish people. And that's how we come together, because every marriage is coming together of two people with two separate perspectives. Of course, when people are in love, love is blinding. They don't realize that they're two perspectives. It's all one. We're all one. Wonderful. Then you wake up after the honeymoon and you realize, oops, the other person is actually different than I. Okay, now what do we do? Okay, so that's what the temple is. Temple is, how do we reunite with God in a marriage if we're so different? Why are we so different? Our consciousness, just a basic idea of what is reality. For us, reality is physical. For God, reality is spiritual. Okay, so what do we do here? So there's a partition, and that's what the second verse says. The menorah you light outside the partition. What's the partition? Beneath the partition, the Holy of Holies is the divine perspective. If you went into the Holy of Holies and you sense the tablets of testimony, you have God's perspective where nothing else matters. The only thing that exists is holiness. We are outside that partition. We, on a regular basis, we cannot cultivate that perspective. We cannot cultivate the divine perspective. That nothing physical matters. The only thing that matters is the connection to God. On a regular basis, we're not capable of cultivating that perspective. In the language of the Kabbalah, that's called higher unity. Yehuda ilah, higher unity. When do we cultivate that, by the way? On Yom Kippur, we don't eat, we don't drink, we have nothing physical. But also every day when we say the Shema, we cover our eyes and we say, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. Lord is one means nothing else exists. So why do you have to cover your eyes? Because if you open your eyes, you'll see that other things exist, right? Because it's not our natural consciousness. So we have to block our natural consciousness and say, we want to now develop the divine consciousness. We want to understand God's perspective. God's perspective is God is one, nothing else exists. But for us to understand God's perspective, we have to block out our own perspective. You can't walk around the whole day walking around covering your eyes because you bump your head into a light pole. So eventually we have to open up when we go back to our perspective. I remember we had a teacher in yeshiva who said he's going to pay the medical bills for anybody who walks into a pole because by mistake they were thinking about the Talmud. So if it ever happens to you, you can bill him. That's what he would do. But in any case, what am I saying here? I'm saying there's the higher unity, the perspective of God, that nothing physical really matters. And the only thing that's significant is spiritual. It's a wonderful perspective. It's a divine perspective. But that's beneath, past the partition. We can't go there. We don't go there on a regular basis. We go there once a year or every day for the moment that's like our Yom Kippur. Then we say, where do we hang out? We hang out in the lower unity, what the Kabbalah calls it. Lower unity, Yehuda Tata, lower unity. By the way, that's why after Shema, we say Baruch Shem. We insert a verse that's not in the Bible. And we insert another verse. The Kabbalah says that's the perspective of the lower unity. We can't always feel that God is the only existence, but we could say, blessed is the glory of his kingdom forever. We're in God's kingdom, but the kingdom exists. There is something other than the king, right? So that's the lower unity. So the rest of the day, we're in the lower unity. What happens in the lower unity? Well, we eat bread. We have our physical needs. That's the table that's outside the curtain. But we also have spiritual moments. And the spiritual moments is the menorah. So what we're trying, what God is telling us here, that there will be a miracle also outside the chamber. In other words, even if you don't get to the upper unity, even if you're not able to develop the divine perspective where nothing physical is significant, it's only spirituality. We can't get there. We're not supposed to get there. We're not allowed to go there. We're not allowed to go there only on Yom Kippur. So we live outside the partition. That's okay. Because even in our reality, in that reality that we understand, we could still connect to the truth of God because the truth of God exists in our reality as well. And that's the Westernmost candle that shines also in the outer chamber. So the point here is when, like in any relationship, in a marriage, the purpose is not to share the same perspective, to be the same. No, that's not the purpose. The purpose is two people come together. So two people come together, and But what does that mean? That means we never have a disagreement. If we never have a disagreement, that's a problem because one of us are suppressing our opinion because we're different. We're going to see the world differently. So ultimately, it's the ability to understand that there is another perspective different than yours. You respect that perspective, but you don't have to give away your own perspective. And then you can negotiate how to move on. But that's the premise. The premise is the other person's entitled to an opinion just like I am. And the other person doesn't have to erase their opinion. I don't have to erase my opinion. And that's actually what makes the marriage interesting, the tension. So the same thing happens over here. Who's right? The upper unity or the lower unity? Who's right? Is God right or are we right? What's reality? So the Kabbalah says something interesting. The Kabbalah doesn't say God is right. There's a verse in the book of Samuel where Hannah, Samuel's mother, sings to God. She says, Kel Deot Hashem. God is the God of perspectives. Says the Kabbalah, perspectives. What's the perspectives? Upper unity and lower unity. There are two perspectives. So which one is right? Which one is right? They're both right. Depends on your perspective. So we're not willing to say that the lower unity is false. The lower unity is we exist. We're our world. We're creation. We matter. Physicality matters. But it's dependent on God, and it's created by God, and it gets its energy from God, but we still matter. The physical still has significance. The upper unity says nothing matters. Only thing that matters is spirituality. So who's right? We're both right. And that's what we're trying to say. We're trying to say here that even in the outer dimension of the temple, we could still sense the true presence of God by that menorah, by that light, a little bit of authentic connection to God that we have even in our perspective in the physical world. So that's by way of introduction, just to understand what we're doing here. We're moving to the realm of our perspective. And what we're saying is that even in our perspective, where there is physicality, there is the presence of the light, the spiritual existence of God. And therefore we have to know that in our life, God is present even in our perspective. So that's by way of introduction. It was not supposed to take 32 minutes, but it did. So if any questions or comments, please share. Otherwise, we must move on to the garments because that is really the main part of the Parsha. Okay, everything makes sense. So we'll continue. We talk about garments, big day. Before we even get into the specific garments, you hear this every year, but I have to say it again. I have to talk about the garments. What does garments mean and what do garments represent? What is the etymology of garments? This is not a distraction, so I shouldn't have to talk about the boring details of the garments. I'm going to get there too, also, God willing. But let's take 5 minutes and talk about what we talk about every year, which I like to call the Kabbalah of Garments. And garments is an interesting concept because on the surface, it's very superficial, right? You go to the store, you spend a lot of money. The garment industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry. They keep telling you, you have to change the garments. The old ones you have are no good. You have to have new ones. I don't know why. It's perfect. Look, my suit looks perfectly fine, but that's the garment business. You have to keep changing and you have to keep being updated and you have to fit in. And it seems like an obsession in superficiality. It's the outside. In fact, if you look at the Hebrew word for garment, it's a beautiful word because beged comes from the word bagad, livgod, betrayal. Okay, obviously Judaism does not really, would not hold garments in a high esteem if they refer to it as the etymology is betrayal. Why are garments betrayal? So there are multiple reasons. Number one, we are garments introduced in the Torah. So they're introduced after the sin of the tree of knowledge, which means if we're in our natural state, if we're in our most spiritual, egoless state, the way Adam and Eve were before the sin, where it's all about service of God, not about themselves or their own pleasure or their own consciousness, you don't need garments. What do I need garments for? When I myself, I don't need garments. What do I need garments for? The garments are a result of the betrayal of the commandment of God. God says, don't eat of the tree of knowledge. They eat of the tree of knowledge. They betray God, and boom, they've sensed their own nakedness. They sense their own shame, and they need garments. So garments are introduced because of the betrayal of God's word. Now, in addition, what is garments? Garments is the way you hide. You hide behind garments. You can be a simple person, and you put on a fancy suit, and everybody will respect you, right? Everybody knows the experiments that they do. They send somebody to the train station and asking for money for a ticket. And basically the response is basically the way they're dressed. If they're dressed poor, they could stand the whole day and make $8. If they can be dressed with an Armani suit and within 1 hour, they make thousands of dollars, because that's how we judge people. We judge people the way by their externality, and it's a betrayal. It doesn't mean I'm one way or the other. I remember there was one very well-dressed guy in Greenwich, always well-dressed, tip-top. And once we had a Hebrew school event, and we went to, it sounds funny, we went to a baseball game in Bridgeport. I forget the name. It's like I don't know, a little league, whatever it is. And this guy, all of a sudden, dresses down. I didn't recognize him. And basically, he wanted to blend in. He didn't want to look like a hedge fund manager from Greenwich. And it's a betrayal. You can dress like whatever you want. It's beged. It's superficial. You can lie. You could be poor and dress up wealthy. You could be wealthy, dress up poor. There's nothing true about it. So that's the word beged, betrayal. And that's what the garments are. Now the question becomes, is that so terrible? Is betrayal so terrible? Is there anything good in the ability to betray? And here the Kabbalah says, the concept of betrayal, what does betrayal mean? Betrayal means that your outside doesn't reflect your inside. That's betrayal. Is that a good quality or a bad quality? So the Kabbalah says it's actually a very good quality because it can work the other way around too. I'm not in a good mood. I'm not happy. I don't want to go out. I put on a fancy suit. I put on a fancy dress. All of a sudden, the outside starts to affect how the inside feels. Okay, so that's a betrayal because I'm not being honest. I feel sad. I feel alone. I don't feel festive. But if I put on a festive garment, the nature of the garment, that's what the Kabbalah says. The nature, the koach makif, it's the encompassing light. It's going to affect you. What you wear affects you, whether you like it or not. Just like you eat a bagel, you're going to be satisfied. The garment you put on encompasses you, creates an atmosphere for you, whether you like it or not. You want to feel good. You should look good. You should dress up good. That's what the Kabbalah, it's the reality of life. You don't need the Kabbalah to tell it to you, but the Kabbalah says it's not just superficial. It comes from a deep spiritual place. The ability to betray goes both ways. It's negative and positive too. I could betray the way I feel and the outside put on a nice garment, and that's going to affect how I feel on the inside. Okay, so that's the betrayal could lead to something good. In fact, in Hebrew, there's another word for garment. much less commonly used in the Torah, but it's used in the 5 books of Moses and other places too. We had it 2 weeks ago in the portion of Mishpatim, or was it 3 weeks ago? 3 weeks ago. Or was it 2 weeks ago? Yisra, Mishpatim, Truma, 2 weeks ago. There talks about the laws of a lost object, talks about salma. In modern Hebrew, salma is like simla, which means dress, more like a feminine garment. But in biblical Hebrew, salma is any garment, male, female, a garment. Another word for garment is salma. What does salma come from? Shin lamed mem hey, shlema, complete wholesomeness. Oh, so a garment is not just betrayal, but it's also wholesomeness. Okay, the betrayal will make you wholesome. I'm not happy, I don't feel good, I don't feel happy. Betray that feeling. On the outside, put on a garment, and that will make you wholesome on the inside. Okay, now let's get a little bit deeper, because according to the Kabbalah, we know, we discuss this in the JLI, but we discuss this all the time in the Tanya classes all the time, that according to the Kabbalah, we have 3 garments: thought, speech, and action. Thought, speech, and action are garments, and they're betrayal. I could betray every day. The thought, speech, and action is a lie. What I love doesn't lie to me. If I love you and I feel it, that's not a lie. But what I say means nothing. I could say I love you and I don't really love you. I don't love you at this time, or I don't feel the love. I could say I love you. I could even do something for you, but that betrays how I feel. So thought, speech, and action really is the garments, and they betray that. I betray every day. I smile. If I smile, I smile to you. Does that really mean I'm happy to see you? Not necessarily, but thought, speech, and action, smile as an action, could betray my inner self. Okay, is that good or bad? Well, you want to live in a world where you can't hide. Everybody knows exactly what you think about them. All of society would break down. Nobody would take my calls. So the point here is this. The point here is that according to the Kabbalah, thought, speech, and action is betrayal, but betrayal could make you complete. How so? I'm not happy. What should I do? I'm not happy. Says the Kabbalah, you're not happy? Doesn't matter. Think happy thoughts, do happy things, and speak happy words. Smile at somebody and say good morning. You act happy, you will become happy. How so? Because the garments affect the person who's wearing them. In the physical sense, when I put on a fancy suit, it affects how I feel, but in the spiritual sense as well. When I act in a certain way, when I act happy, if I start dancing, I'm going to become happy. It's very hard to dance and not be happy. You could not dance, but if you're dancing, it's very hard to dance and not be happy. It's probably almost impossible, right? Because that's the nature. Just like a suit affects the person who wears the suit, the garments, the action affects the person. So I'm not kind. What does the Kabbalah, what does Judaism say? You're not kind? Betray yourself, act kind. No, I don't betray myself. I'm very honest. I would never act kind if I'm not kind. I would never say, please come to my home to enjoy my backyard if I'm not a kind person. No, the Kabbalah says, garments, remember garment, betray yourself. Go against your nature, go against the way you feel, invite the person in, act kind. Why? Because the betrayal, ultimately, the beged will lead to simla, will lead to completeness, because the outside affects the inside. Okay, we can talk about this forever. We don't have that much time. What does this have to do with the high priest? So the high priest represents the Jewish people. You're coming before God. I would expect God should say, look, I don't really care about your clothing. I want to know what's going on inside of you, Mr. Aaron. Is your heart pure? Are your thoughts pure? That's not what we hear about. We hear about God wants to know, tell me about your garments. Make sure you have beautiful garments, and we'll talk about what the garments represent. But the bottom line is, even on the most physical sense, you're coming to serve God, beautiful garments. But that's so external. Why doesn't God care what Aaron's thinking about, or what he's feeling, or what his deepest emotions are? Sorry, we're not interested. Why? Because of course the person coming to serve God is a mess. But God says, you're a mess, no problem. Put on beautiful garments. That's in your power. You can't always change the inside, but you could change the outside. You could change the garments. And you change the garments, ultimately, that will trickle back to the inside. So that's the story of the garments of the high priest. Before we get to the specifics, the idea that if I put on beautiful garments, it makes me worthy of coming before God. External garments are external, yes, but external affects my insides, affects the person I am. And in simple English, I put on, even in a simple sense, you put on garments for an occasion, it affects in society today, we are becoming less and less formal. But in Judaism, one of the requirements for prayer is you have to become, losing my connection here. My connection is telling me, I'm not sure if it's spiritual, if it's bottom line is this, in Judaism, that one of the requirements for prayer is to put on something dressed more formal for prayer. And certainly on Shabbat. In fact, the teachings right, not so much, what's the word I'm looking for? Other Hasidic perspectives say that the Shabbat garments are like the garments of the high priest. In other words, you need to dress more formal because that affects your mood. In a spiritual sense, it's also the garments of the soul. Make yourself beautiful garments. Even if I'm not worthy, Aaron, I'm Aaron. Aaron represents every Jew. I'm coming to serve God. I say, I don't feel like I'm worthy. I don't feel kind. I don't feel worthy. Don't worry. Do the right thing, right thought, speak the right word. And the garments, even though right now it feels like a betrayal, no, but the betrayal will become complete. It will become, it will lead you to the concept of the salma, of completeness, and it will affect your inside. So that's a little bit about the garments in general. And now we can talk about the specifics of the garments of the high priest. Okay, the first thing we're going to think about is the first one that Torah introduces, and that's the Khoshen, and that is the apron, and Khoshen is the breastplate that's connected to the apron. Hard to explain exactly, but even by reading the verses, Rashi says, oh, it's not so easy to understand. So, right, thank God for the modern world, we have pictures. So I'm sharing some of the pictures here. We'll go to the Khoshen and ephod. So I guess this is okay. This is the ephod from the person. It has straps on the waist and it has straps that go up to the shoulder. So this is the back of the high priest with the apron, and this would be rolled down, and this is the front. And we'll see in a minute that the stones have the names of the 12 tribes inscribed on these two stones. Not everybody knows about this because the more famous stones are the ones on the, but there are stones that were on the shoulder straps as well, the shoulder straps of the apron. And then we scroll down and you get to the breastplate, okay? Which is the 12 with the plate with 12 stones, each inscribed one of the 12 tribes of Israel, and then they would connect it in the front to the apron, which was in the back, and hopefully at the end you'll see how it looks when he's wearing it. Okay, we're going to have to wait to the end to see all the other garments, but in any case, it looks something like this. Here you see the high priest, he's got the other garments as well, but you see, for the purpose of our discussion, you see the apron, the ephod, the straps going up. On his shoulders here, you don't see that well, but there's the two stones on the shoulders. Then there's breastplate on his chest with the 12 stones. So that is the beginning of that's the first of the two garments that we're going to discuss, is the apron and the breastplate. So maybe we'll read a few of the verses inside just to get a feel, and then we will see what the significance is. Here we go, verse 6. And they shall make the ephod of gold, blue, purple, and crimson wool, and twisted fine linen, the work of a master weaver. It shall have two connected shoulder straps on both of its ends, and it shall be entirely connected. And its decorative bands, which is above it, shall be on the same work, emanating from it, gold, blue, purple, and crimson wool, and twisted fine linen. In other words, we talked about in verse 6, we talk about the straps that come to the shoulders, and verse 8 is the belt that allows the priest to tie the two sides of the robe in front of him. And then we talk about the stones, verse 9. And you shall take two shoham stones and engrave upon them the names of the sons of Israel. 6 of their names on one stone, and the names of the remaining 6 on the second stone, according to the births. And he continues, verse 12, and you shall put the 2 stones upon the shoulder straps of the ephod as stones of remembrance from the sons of Israel. And Aaron shall carry the names before the Lord upon his 2 shoulders as a remembrance. Then we go to the second reading, and we talk about making the settings of gold. old Khoshen of judgment, verse 15, and the work of a master weaver, you shall make it like the work of the ephod of gold, blue, purple, crimson wool, and twisted fine linen, you shall make it. And verse 17, you shall fill it you shall fill into it stone fillings, 4 rows of stones, 1 row odem pitam bareket. Thus shall be one. Thus shall the one be. The second row nofech sapir v'yahalom. Again, different names of various of all the 12 tribes, and then the rings taken into the ephod. And the verse I'm trying to get to is verse 28. And they shall fasten the Khoshen by its rings to the rings of the ephod with a blue cord, so that it may be upon the band of the ephod, and the Khoshen will not move off the ephod. This is one of the 613 commandments, namely that the Khoshen and ephod, these two garments, the apron worn in the back and the breastplate worn in the front, should be attached, and these two garments should become one garment, and they shouldn't be separated. That's the commandment. So we want to discuss this a little bit. One question to enter is, if it's so important that they're always attached, why are they two separate garments? That's one question. Another question is, why do we need the names of all 12 tribes written and engraved twice? So they appear once on the chest of the high priest. Each tribe gets its own stone. That's one form, the way that the tribes appear in front on the high priest, on the chest of the high priest. And then you also have, in addition to that, like we mentioned, on the shoulders, you have 2 stones, this time 2 stones, and 6 per stone. Why do I need the names twice, and why the different change, and what does the breastplate represent, and what does the shoulders represent? All this, it has to be put into the mix, and then we have to explain what the spiritual significance is in our life as well. So there are various ways of interpreting it. I'm going to start with one interpretation, which is the same theme as what we said till now. So I want to stay consistent, and then I'm going to go for a little bit of a different interpretation. So the first interpretation is as follows. There are 2 ways a person could serve God. You could serve God like the Khoshen, like the breastplate, or you could serve God like the ephod, like the apron. What does that mean? So the Khoshen is on the front of the person. The ephod is in the back. The Khoshen is on the heart. So that represents that you're serving God with your passion, with your emotion. I'm doing the right thing because I want to do it. I want to serve God. I'm full with enthusiasm. I'm full of passion. I'm full of love. I'm full of excitement. That's when the tribes of Israel are on the chest of the high priest in front of his heart, because that represents when the Jewish person being represented by Aaron is infused with heart, with emotion. And the reason why each tribe gets its own stone, because the emotional makeup of every tribe, more specifically of every person within every tribe, is unique. Your emotions are not my emotions. They're different. When it comes to action, we all do the same mitzvah. We all eat the same matzah on Passover. So the action, when it comes to the world of action, we're all the same. But when it comes to the world of emotion, every person is different. And everybody isn't serving God, but everyone serves God in their own way, in their own unique, specific emotional makeup. So the person, what the breastplate represents is that the high priest is serving on behalf of the people, representing the people. But which people? The people who are emotionally inspired. And because they're emotionally inspired, they have their name written on the chest, on the front of the heart of the high priest. And that's what the verse says. The verse says that Aaron will carry them on his heart. Heart represents the emotion. Okay, fine. That is one way of serving God. The other way of serving God is I'm not on the breastplate. I'm in the back. What does the back mean? The apron on the back. The back represents I'm doing something, but I have no excitement and I have no passion. When I am forced to do something, that is represented with the back. Because when I want something, that's when I look at it. If I don't want it, I just do it without looking. We always say the Medrash as a metaphor is if you have to give something to your friend, you face your friend and you look them in the eye and you give them what you want to give them. If you have to give something to your enemy because you have no choice, you throw it behind your back. You don't want to see them. That represents your will is not invested in them. Okay. So now the apron represents the Jew who he doesn't have the passion, doesn't have emotion, but he'll do the right thing without the proper feeling and emotion. And that's why the apron has the names of the Jewish people written on the shoulders. The shoulders is the seat of the action, the arm that's going to move. So that represents the Jew. He's not by the heart. He's not by Aaron's heart. He doesn't have emotion, but he'll do the right thing, even though that action does not have the proper emotion. That's okay. That's another way to serve God. In fact, it's interesting. I'm just thinking about this now. The first garment we talk about is the ephod, is the apron, even before we talk about the breastplate. That's fine. One way to serve God is to do the right thing. But I don't have emotion. Doesn't matter. You do what's supposed to be done. Make sure the action is okay. Be written, the name should be written on the shoulders, which is, by the way, why not every tribe gets its own stone when it comes to the action. Why? Because when it comes to action, there's not much difference between people. We all do the right thing. You all have to give $1 to the charity box. That's not a difference between people. The difference then becomes how much kindness do I feel when I do it? Emotions are different. Everybody has to put on tefillin. Everybody has to eat matzah on Passover. Okay, the difference is the spiritual meaning and feeling. What do I feel when I eat it? Okay, there you have distinctions. But in the actions, there are really no distinctions. And that's why you have 2 stones on your shoulders. In other words, multiple tribes on each stone, because we're talking about action. Okay, wonderful. So now we know there are 2 ways to serve God. With the emotion or with the action. And that's what the garments represent. The breastplate is the emotion, the garment, the apron is the action. What's the most interesting part of this verse? The most interesting part of this commandment is what we mentioned at the end. We mentioned at the end, verse 28. Verse 28 of chapter 28, beautiful. 28 is koach, is strength. Verse 28 of chapter 28, they shall attach the breastplate from its rings to the rings of the ephod with a turquoise woolen cord, so that it will remain above the belt of the ephod. And the breastplates will not be, here they say, loosened, lo yizach, not be separated from upon the ephod. The breastplate, the ephod, the apron, and the breastplate are connected. They will not be separated. They will not be severed. So the Hasidic interpretation is, if you have one, you will have the other. I have no inspiration. We start. The first thing is the apron. I'm the back. I'm not on Aaron's chest. I can't cultivate emotion. I can't cultivate excitement. I wake up in the morning. I have so much to do. I don't have the passion. I don't have the excitement. What do? Be an apron. Back. Do it without excitement, without the heart. The names are on the shoulders. The shoulders are the seat of the action. Do it. Do the right thing. Come to shul. Put on your tefillin. Pray to God. Do whatever. Do something. The Torah promises you that the ephod, the breastplate, the apron will not be severed from the breastplate. In other words, eventually, if you do it enough, you will start feeling it, because the breastplate is connected to the apron, to the apron. The breastplate is connected to the apron. The action leads in to the emotion. So that's where the idea that we started out with, where the betrayal leads to completeness, where the action leads to wholesome completeness, is also expressed in the first 2 garments. Okay, we have 4 minutes left, and I want to spend a minute or 2 on something that I don't think we spoke about in the past, but it's the tzitz. Tzitz is a funny word, but tzitz is the plate that the high priest wore on his forehead, and it was made of gold, and it was written upon it, Kodesh LaHashem, holy to God. So let's look at the picture, and then we'll read the verses, and we'll see what that could mean in our life. The tzitz. Here is the picture of the tzitz. So you had the plate of gold written Kodesh La Hashem, holy to God, but they put God on top. Yud Hey Vav Kei, God's name is on top. God, holy to. You read it from down to up. Holy to God. And then you have the strings where it would connect around and above the priest's head, and on top of that was the hats. So here you have the picture. Could you see it? You can't see that well because it's not that big, the plate, but he wore the plate on his forehead. On the plate, it said God's name. So let's read the verses and we'll see what the verses tell us about the tzitz. And then hopefully we can get, if we have a minute or two, we can get to a little bit of the spiritual meaning of the tzitz. Here we go. Verse 36, chapter 28, verse 36. And you shall make a show plate of pure gold, and you shall engrave upon it like the engraving of a seal, holy to the Lord. And you shall place it upon a cord of blue wool, and it shall go over the cap, and it shall be opposite the front side of the cap. Okay. Verse 38 is interesting. It shall be upon Aaron's forehead, and Aaron shall bear the iniquity of the holy things that the children of Israel sanctify for all their holy gifts. What does it mean? It means the Jewish people bring gifts, they bring offerings to God. But sometimes there are iniquity, there are sins connected to the gifts. Like Rashi explains, if a person brings the gift and they're spiritually impure, they're ritually impure. So that's a sin. They may not know about it. So the tzitz atones for all of that. It shall be upon his forehead constantly to make them favorable before the Lord. So you have the tzitz, the breastplate, the show plate on the head of the high priest. That makes it, first of all, has to be constant, should be constantly on his head, and it makes them favorable before the Lord. Now, it doesn't mean constantly. He's allowed to go to sleep, he's allowed to go home. It means that when he's doing the service, it has to constantly be upon the head, which is strange because every other garment also has to be constantly. But no, only about the tzitz does it say that it's constant before his head. So that what does this mean? It's not going to be able to do justice in 30 seconds, but I'm just going to go give a little bit here. According to the Kabbalah, the tzitz represents the consciousness. A person has to always have this consciousness of God on his forehead. On his forehead means in his forefront. You always have to have constant awareness of God. And that's why when it comes to the tzitz, it says it should be on his head, on his forehead continuously, because the consciousness that a person could have, a person should have continuously. Now, how do you have continuous consciousness, awareness of God? We're doing the meditation JLI, and we're trying to figure out how to create awareness and consciousness and how to do it the entire day. So maybe the tzitz will be a preview. So according to the Kabbalah, there's basically two ways to have awareness. One concept of awareness comes through intellectual meditation. Da'at, knowledge. I think about the greatness of God. I pray, I meditate, and that creates emotion in the heart because the mind, the cognition is the parent, and the emotion is the child, and the knowledge of God, the meditating on God creates awareness, and that awareness creates emotion, and now I love God, and now I connect to God. And it's a wonderful thing. That's what we try to do when we pray in the morning. It's wonderful. The problem with this form of the shortcoming of that form of awareness that comes from da'at, comes from knowledge of God, the problem is that it doesn't last the whole day. Because it's based on the cognition. When I go to work and my mind starts processing other stimuli, I start thinking about how am I going to beat the traffic? How am I going to get around how am I going to get to the train on time? How am I going to make a few dollars? Once the consciousness moves and thinks about other things, the dot thinks about other things. So there's no longer any consciousness within the mind. There's no longer consciousness that is produced from the cognition, which can create emotion of love. So what happens then? So the Kabbalah says, then you look at the forehead. What does forehead represent? The forehead represents, it's the covering, the outer shell, the outer covering of the brain. In other words, we're not talking about awareness that comes from cognition, from meditation, from thinking actively, which creates love in the heart. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about something that goes deeper than that, and it's more subconscious. And that the Kabbalah calls the ratzon, the will. I could want something even if I don't feel the passion in my heart right now. In other words, it's called devotion. Okay, so you have a relationship. And the question becomes, could I feel love to my beloved all the time, a whole day? The answer is, I hate to be the one to bear of bad news. The answer is no. You're not going to always feel the passionate love. Okay, so what happens when I don't? Passionate love is wonderful, but it's not going to be tamid. It's not going to be consistent. Okay, so what is the love? What is the relationship predicated upon? If I don't feel the love at the moment, well, it's on will. It's devotion. I decide that I want to be connected to you, and therefore I'm loyal to you, and therefore I'm connected to you, and I care about you, even though I don't necessarily feel the passionate love at the time. That is what the Kabbalah calls will, and that is expressed in the forehead, which is the cover of the brain, where the brain has the deeper sense of cognition. And what we're saying here is the external will, the will that is not necessarily creating passionate love in the heart, but it's will, it's devotion that a person can have the entire day, tamid, continuously, and that you take with you wherever you go. You're going to work, you're going and get involved in the physical matters of the body, it's fine. You don't feel a passionate love to God, that's okay. But what you have is the statement, Kodesh la Hashem. Your will is that everything you do should be holy to God. In other words, my will, I want to be connected to God, and I want that everything that I do has a spiritual purpose, and that purpose is to connect to God, to be holy to God, to bring God's holiness into the world. And again, even if I don't feel it, but I'm devoted to it because it comes from the will, and the will can be constant. So that's the story in short. A lot more to say. But I hope this is at least enough to wet our tongue, and then we can explore further. So any comments or questions, please share. Otherwise, have a wonderful day, and we'll meet each other.